Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the Ryzen 5 1600 paired with the GTX 1060 3GB on many games. You can skip to one of those particular games by checking the timestamps down in the description. This will be with stock settings, so the Ryzen 5 1600 will be running at 3.4 GHz. I know the base clock is 3.2, but by itself the CPU went to 3.4, so there's no overclocking here. That's how the CPU is working out of the box. Then for the RAM, I'm using two 8GB sticks, so we have 16GB of RAM on dual channel, running at 3000 MHz. I'm using 16GB since some of these games use more than 8GB of RAM, and just by doing that you can see which games are over the 8GB limit, but I'll talk more about that at the conclusion of the video, so stay tuned for that. First I'm gonna be testing Battlefield 1 on a 64-player multiplayer match, since I'm trying to stress the CPU and GPU as much as possible. So I always play in the same map, so you have a way to compare it with my other videos with the same GPU. And well, so far for what I tested here, using the same settings as I said as on my previous videos, you'll be seeing that I'm getting pretty much over 60 frames per second all the time with the settings I chose here. It's not perfect, it might sometimes drop below 60 in very intensive multiplayer matches, but that's the problem with testing multiplayer. It can be very different because it depends on what other players are doing, which always changes. It's never the same on each match, but you can have an idea by all the amount of explosions and stuff going on. But yeah, this one was great so far. I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Hier, erste Hilfe! Versorgt keine Wunden! Erste Hilfe, nimm schon! Lass mich deine Wunden versorgen!
Now I'm testing Far Cry 5, and the only two things that I lowered from the maximum were shadows, geometry and vegetation. The rest was just maxed out on 1080p, and I'm testing the same areas I always test. It's one of these small towns, being attacked by a good amount of enemies, and you'll notice when there's a big explosion, for example a car blows up or something like that, that the GPU usage can drop very fast, then it recovers instantly, and that usually makes the frame rate drop into the low 60s or the upper 50s. Not really a big deal if you ask me. So yeah, watch out for the big explosions and smoke and all that kind of stuff. That can usually drop the frame rate, but other than that, the game stays over 60 frames per second the majority of the time, and it's very enjoyable to play. I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Target up, fucking choir.
Praise the Father for choosing me to live.
If he says he wants to leave Eden's Gate, then we gotta try and help him.
Peggies are trying to take him back. We gotta stop him.
Come on, we gotta protect him.
Fuck! Peggy's at the back! I have eyes on a target.
Watch out! Cover! Your world!
PUBG or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, with pretty much a mix between high and ultra, except in textures, which are on medium in order to avoid going over the 3 gigs of VRAM limit. And I'll be just first looting a little in Pochinki at the red zone, which means a lot of explosions and all that kind of stuff. It's not as big of a hit as it used to be since the version 1.0, but it's still a good way to see the town, which I usually get the biggest drops in performance. And then I just be going into a car as fast as possible, so someone shoots at me, which usually makes the frame rate drop. This game doesn't take advantage of more than 4 threads. As far as my experience goes, it usually maxes out 2 or 3 cores, no more than that, unfortunately. I'll talk to you again in the next game. Fortnite Battle Royale, and on this one I'll be using the maximum settings since it's usually less demanding on the CPU compared to other games. And I don't have much to say about this one. The GPU stays maxed out all the time. There might be a couple drops in the GPU usage here and there, but they are very sudden and it recovers very quickly. So yeah, this one is over 60 all the time. You can even use high resolutions if you wanted. The game should still run just fine. So I'll talk to you again in the next game. GTA 5 once again 1080p, and I'll be using the same settings as on my previous 15 games video, which was with an i3 8100, and I'll be saying it once again. I'm using NVIDIA PCSS shadows, but if you change it from that to softest shadows, the game should be more stable overall. I was just pushing the GPU as much as possible. So the testing methodology, as always, I'll be going into middle of 2 big streets and start just blowing up cars, so the police shows up. There's a lot of AI going on, a lot of explosions, so the GPU is maxed out as well. And the lowest drop I got so far was to 45 FPS, when there were a ton of cars destroyed, on fire, and more explosions in the background. Take this as a stress test, pretty much. This shouldn't happen all the time unless you have infinite health or something like that, because I'm very close to those explosions and there are many of them on screen. So yeah, I consider it still a great experience, so I'll talk to you again in the next game.
This don't make no fucking sense.
Assassin's Creed Origins, I'll be doing 1080p once again, with something close to the high settings. I'll be just lowering textures a little bit so we don't go over the 3 gigs of VRAM limit. And in order to push the CPU and GPU as much as possible, I'll be testing in Alexandria, which to a big amount of people is a big CPU bound place. I'll mostly show you first draw distances in the city, and after that I'll be fighting some guards and all the kind of stuff, and that's because the frame rate usually suffers the most when there's a fight going on. But yeah, this game is very CPU intensive. I saw the CPU usage go up to 83%, so we're talking 83% on a 6-core 12-thread CPU, which is crazy if you ask me, but I'll talk to you again in the next game.
I should not be seen in this area.
Wait a minute.
Bring him down!
Hey, what the? Got you.
Got to get out of here! Wait a second!
Pull your guts so slowly.
Shit! Bring him down! Hey!
No!
Out! Ready to serve. Hey, what? Alarm! Over here!
Whoa.
Die! I can make the shot!
Better without all that. Lighting the Brazilian! Climbing to freedom, idiot!
Whoa.
Lighting the Brazilian!
Yeah. Whoa.
Stop my Serapis! You cannot escape! Fuck you!
I'm testing Rainbow Six Siege, and on this one once again 1080p, and I'll be using TAA with resolution scale at 100%, so we're actually playing on 1080p. We used to have an option called temporal filtering that improved performance quite a bit by lowering the image quality, but there wasn't a big visual impact, at least in most people's opinion, and for some reason Ubisoft mixed that with temporal anti-aliasing. The game looks blurrier than before, which forces us to use a high resolution in order to have a less blurry game, but on the performance side we're over 60 frames per second pretty much all the time, so I wouldn't worry at all. The game runs just fine, and I'll talk to you again in the next game.
The diffuser has been secured.
Cluster charge activated.
possession.
Now I'm testing Forza Horizon 3 once again on 1080p by using threaded optimization, which makes the game take advantage of more CPU threads, which is always good, since this game was terrible at that job in the past. And unfortunately for this one I don't have good news. I used the same settings as on the i3-8100 plus GTX 1060 video, and here for some reason the frame times are very inconsistent and the VRAM is higher, and I'm using exactly the same settings. So think about it like this: on the i3 with the same settings I got over 60 frames per second most of the time, with some drops into the 50s. Here it drops below 60 way more often. For some reason we're hitting the 3 gig limit, but on the previous video it was around 2.9 gigabytes of usage. So my recommendation for this one is to lower the dynamic geometry setting, the texture quality setting, and the world card level of detail setting. That should help out to smoothen out things here, but I'm not sure what's up with that, since on the previous video it was working just fine. But I'll talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Just Cause 3. Using almost the highest settings, I just lowered textures to high until it's seen as SMAA, and I also disabled motion blur. And what I'll be doing here is to just blow up a couple gas stations and fly around between them, since usually those are the biggest explosions in the whole game. So yeah, the explosion is GPU bound, the movement should be more CPU bound, and it was pretty much over 60 frames per second with some stutters every now and then that you'll see in the frame time graph. But also keep in mind that sometimes this game can go over the 8 gigs of VRAM limit. That usually happens to me when I play more than 30 to 40 minutes of the game, so be aware of that. But I'll talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Rise of the Tomb Raider, and I'll be using DirectX 11 on this one, on pretty much the high preset with 16 times anisotropic filtering, which is the only thing I changed from the preset. And I'll be in the village area, which is usually the most intensive place in the game, and you'll notice that the CPU limits the GPU because the GPU usage is below 99% at the start of the footage. Then it just stabilizes a little bit because it's less CPU bound. For this one I would recommend overclocking the CPU. I managed to hit 4 GHz on a DEEPCOOL GAMMAXX 400 CPU cooler, so it shouldn't be a big challenge to get to that frequency. So I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Well, if they need arrowheads for the battle, then I need more firearms. I said they'd come. Never encouraged me so.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcoming.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work would go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can do.
They will likely come from the air.
Jacob is assembling fighters in the upper village to draw their attention.
I'm testing The Witcher 3 using almost the maximum settings. I'll be just lowering foliage, visibility, range and detail level from ultra to high, and I also lowered ambient occlusion from HBAO Plus to SSAO in order to try and get over 60 frames per second as consistent as possible, and it was possible in this game. I went into Novigrad, which is one of the most CPU bound places in the whole game, and it will be very clear because as I'm getting closer and closer to the city, the CPU usage will start just being higher, but this CPU is still more than enough to maintain the GPU at 99% the big majority of the time, which means that we stay over 60 frames per second, so I'll talk to you again in the next game.
I serve the eternal fire.
Oh.
The eternal fire will guide us. Do you see what to surrender unorthodox folks.
Now I'm testing Hitman using DirectX 11, since DirectX 12 usually means a slightly lower frame rate, plus the VRAM usage will be higher, which here is not really a good idea for us, because we only have 3 gigs of VRAM, and I'll be testing the Marrakesh level, which is the level with the highest NPC number on screen. As you can see, there's a lot of people on screen, there's a lot going on, and that's a big hit to both the CPU and GPU. The GPU usage will start dropping, and the frame rate a little bit as well, so I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Oh, welcome, welcome. Didn't see me there.
I could just about strangle you. Stomach.
I'm testing CSGO using low settings on 1080p, since most people that watch my previous videos ask me to use low settings to just push the CPU as much as possible, I guess. And I'll be using the benchmark tool, so keep in mind this is a stress test. This won't be the same as playing a multiplayer match. This is a controlled environment. There's a ton of smoke concentrated in a single place, so the smoke in the game itself is not as big of a hit as you see here. And at the end of the footage you have an average frame rate, so you'll be able to compare this to my previous videos, for example the Ryzen 5 1600 with the 1050 Ti, with the i3 8100 and the 1060, all that kind of stuff, so you can see how CSGO performs in comparison. Since this is the same test, you can do the comparisons very easily by looking at the average frame rate. So yeah, this is a stress test. It's meant to be as intensive as possible, and this game does not take advantage of all the threads available. As you'll see, some of them are just maxed out, but I'll talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Fallout 4, and on this one I'll be doing 1080p once again, with almost the maximum settings. The only things I lowered were shadow distance from ultra to high, and weapon degrees is turned off. This one was hitting into the mid 40s as the lowest possible, at least in this area of the game, which is Diamond City. Usually here is when I get the worst performance. In the moments when it drops below 60, you'll see that the GPU usage will be below 80%. That's what usually happens on this game, but I had less of an issue using Intel CPUs, so this game seems to be just working better on Intel chips, or at least that's what happened in my experience. But if you have a different experience, just let me know down in the comments. Once again, overclocking the CPU here should help you out, but I'll talk to you again in the next game.
Got too much dirt in that hair? Get it trimmed. You won't regret it.
Move along. Hey, swata, swata, swata can hit. Boom!
Synth-free shopping, right here.
GAMMAXX cares about you. Oh,
Nothing to see here.
And finally, Batman Arkham Knight. I'll be using 1080p, but I lowered textures from high to normal, since this game is very VRAM intensive. But despite the options menu warning me that I'm over the limit, the game was actually very stable. Yeah, we're very close to the 3 gigs of VRAM usage, but the game overall was still completely playable. There was no constant stutter all the time, but this game is not free of performance issues. Usually when you're going very fast in the Batmobile, or just flying around very quickly, the game can usually stutter every now and then. It seems to be a relation to how the game streams new assets when you're going very fast, so there's not much that we can do about it, but overall it's still a great experience if you ask me. I played in way worse conditions, so I think you can manage just fine. So yeah guys, conclusion time. There are also more videos in my channel that you can check, this same GPU with the i3-8100 or with the 1050 Ti, so you can see the differences against this build. Honestly, despite not being 100% perfect on all games, I'll still recommend it if you want to stream or something like that. We usually have a very good amount of CPU usage to spare, so since we have some room to spare, you can use that to do some encoding when you're doing a stream or something like that. So you should be able to do very good quality streams with this, using the X264 encoder or the NVIDIA encoder if you want. It's still a good combination by that if you ask me, or if you just do some video editing or 3D rendering. The CPU should still be a great choice overall if you don't only do gaming. And I got a very cheap cooler, the DEEPCOOL GAMMAXX 400. By just buying that, I was able to put the CPU at 4 GHz at 1.35 volts. Maybe you're not very lucky, your CPU might not hit 4 GHz at that voltage or something like that, but if you just do some overclocking on your CPU, you should be able to get better results on the games where the GPU usage was dropping. For example, Hitman, Fallout 4, Assassin's Creed Origins, Battlefield 1, but Battlefield 1 was very stable, I have to say. Rise of the Tomb Raider and Forza Horizon 3 as well. Still, if you don't want to overclock, that's fine. The CPU is still great value if you ask me. And on the RAM side of things, 8 GB of RAM is still enough, but some games will go over the 8 GB of RAM limit. Some of them were shown here, like Battlefield 1 multiplayer. Forza Horizon 3 can sometimes go over the limit, just cause 3 after 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay, it can also go over that. And finally, Batman Arkham Knight can go over the 8 GB of system RAM limit, but it's kinda random. Sometimes it goes over, sometimes it starts below 8 GB. So if you go for 8 GB, you can still play just fine on the big majority of the games. Just be sure to use dual channel, 2x4 GB sticks as a minimum. Is very helpful on many games that use a lot of CPU. Battlefield 1, Assassin's Creed Origins and Far Cry 5 are huge examples of this, and the games that use more than 8 gigs usually will have some extra stutters, but it should be fine while you save up to get more system RAM. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching and see you next time.